We're seeing gold in the box, and these boxes are gigantic. I mean, even though you're seeing just a few specks, you know there's a lot of gold in there.
The Bering Sea has broken men, swallowed fortunes, and turned legends into whispers. But tonight, Shawn Pomrenke is chasing something no miner has ever dared. A single haul that could change Nome forever. And trust me, you don't want to miss what's about to unfold. If you're ready to ride the storm with Shawn, smash that like button and subscribe right now. Because this is the moment history either crowns him or destroys him. Waves pounded against steel as Shawn Pomrenke pushed into the ice-thick Bering Sea, the sky above cracking with thunder so violent it sounded like cannon fire. His crew watched in silence, each man knowing this season could break him. The debts were crushing, rivals circled like sharks, and his equipment was barely holding together. Yet here he was, gambling everything on one massive dredge run no sane captain would attempt. Rumors spoke of a vein buried beneath the frozen seafloor, untouched since the first prospectors dared Nome. Shawn swore this was it. Either he claimed the vein, or the Bering Sea would drag his name down forever. The weight of family history clung to every move. The Pomrenkes had lived and bled on these waters, rising to kings and falling to ruin, sometimes in the same season. Shawn could still hear his father's warning echoing in his mind. The ocean gives, then it takes. Every last dollar he had left had been poured into this gamble. Fuel, gear, even untested machines that no one believed could survive these depths. His crew muttered about madness, some half convinced they were following him to their deaths. But Shawn wouldn't hear it. The sea owed him. After decades of near-death toil, it was his turn to collect. Engines roared as the dredge's steel claws ripped downward, punching through layers of shifting ice. The machine groaned like some beast from the deep as it sank 10 feet beneath the frozen surface. Divers in the black water reported strange vibrations, a hollow resonance that didn't belong to stone. Then the cameras flickered, brief flashes of golden streaks running through black rock like lightning veins trapped in time. Suddenly, the ground shifted. A cave-in snapped hoses taut, nearly ripping the entire system into the abyss. Alarms screamed across the deck. The crew begged Shawn to pull back. Instead, he leaned into the chaos. His voice cut through the storm. Full throttle. The dredge shuddered as he forced it deeper, beyond where any man had dared to go. Every slam and shudder seemed to awaken the stories whispered through the camp. Crewmen muttered in the darkness about Russian prospectors who once chased something they called the Golden Shelf, only to vanish without a trace. Even the oldest captains in Nome swore there was something cursed about these waters. Old maps marked with warnings, crude symbols scrawled by trembling hands. Now, Shawn Pomrenke's dredge sat squarely over the same coordinates. He laughed it off in front of his crew, pretending he didn't care for ghost stories. But tucked away in the captain's quarters was a battered notebook, its pages stuffed with rumors, legends, and hand-drawn sketches that he had collected over the years. Shawn never admitted it aloud, but he believed the vein was real, stretching like lightning across the seabed, an untapped fortune waiting for the man bold enough to claim it. And as the dredge roared, the sound of gravel, stone, and glittering gold slamming into the sluice box became deafening, shaking the entire vessel like a drumbeat of destiny. By morning, whispers of what was happening offshore had already reached Nome. Word spread like wildfire. Rival captains gathered on the docks, binoculars fixed on the distant silhouette of Shawn's dredge. The rising smoke, the endless hum of engines, it was the smell of fortune carried on the cold wind. Tony Beats's gnome contacts phoned him with urgent news. Shawn wasn't just scraping the seafloor, he was striking something historic. Beats muttered curses. He knew the Pomrenkes well, and if Shawn really was hitting gold like this, it would shift the balance of Gnome's power. Freddie Dodge heard the rumors too. He called it outright suicide. "Nobody hauls 20 million in one run," he told the miners who pressed him for his thoughts. "It can't be done." But disbelief only fueled the fire. On shore, crews began placing bets. Would Shawn survive the week? Would his dredge collapse under the weight of its own greed? The Pomrenke gamble had become Gnome's most watched drama overnight, and every man with a stake in gold wanted to know if Shawn was about to write his name into legend or disappear beneath the waves like those Russian dreamers before him. Out on the water, Shawn's reality was far louder than the whispers on shore. Nuggets poured from the dredge's belly so fast that the sluice box screamed under the weight, its riffles clogging with yellow treasure that seemed endless. Men worked frantically, shoveling and clearing, their gloves slipping on rock slick with seawater and gold dust. The box wasn't designed to handle this kind of flood, and every second risked its snapping apart under the impossible load. Divers resurfaced, their hands trembling as they lifted chunks of raw ore bigger than fists. They held them up in the floodlights, and for a heartbeat, the entire crew went silent. The gold glowed like fire under glass, heavy, untamed, and impossibly pure. Men who had spent their whole lives chasing flecks smaller than fingernails now cradled boulders of it in their palms. Their eyes watered, some from salt, some from the weight of what they were witnessing. One diver dropped to his knees, clutching his mask, whispering that he'd never seen anything like it. Not in Nome, not in any museum, not in all of Alaska. The belly of the dredge groaned as it filled, barrels, bins, and crates crammed with more than 2,000 pounds of raw gold. Each thud of a full container echoed like a cannon shot, reminding them of the impossible truth. They were pulling a king's ransom from beneath the sea in real time. Exhausted, half delirious, the crew began to cry, laugh, curse, and pray all at once. The air stank of sweat, diesel, and raw greed, the kind of scent that could drive men insane. And in the middle of it all, Shawn Pomrenke stood unmoving, eyes fixed on the sluice box as if in a trance. His lips barely moved, but the men closest to him heard the words, "This is it, the Hall of Legends." The storm above howled in answer, as if the Bering Sea itself recognized the enormity of what had been uncovered. Waves pressed harder against steel, the dredge trembling beneath the weight of history and fortune. Shawn didn't flinch, but every man on board felt the precariousness of the moment. The sea was patient, but it always waited to remind those who dared of its power. The sea chose its moment like a predator waiting in silence. Just as the piles of gold grew higher than any man on board had ever seen, the horizon tore open with a midnight storm. Waves rose like black mountains, slamming into steel until the entire dredge shivered. Then came the ice floes, jagged slabs driven by wind and current, striking the hull with cracks that echoed like cannon fire. The anchor lines groaned under the strain, cords stretched so tight they sounded ready to snap at any heartbeat. The crew froze, each impact rattling their bones, the dread that one strike too many would split their vessel in half. Below deck, the pumps screamed in protest. Slurry choked the system, gold and gravel mixing so thick it turned every pipe into a clogged artery. Water sprayed across the engine room, sparks flying as electrical panels hissed. For a terrifying moment, the smell of burning wire filled the air, promising fire to join the fury of ice. The crew shouted, begged, pleaded with Shawn to stop, to pull back, to save them before the dredge became a coffin. Their voices were swallowed by the wind, but their faces said everything. This was suicide. And yet Shawn Pomrenke didn't move an inch. He stood on the deck, eyes fixed on the sea like a man staring down a god. Then he roared over the storm, his voice tearing through the chaos. Fortune doesn't wait for cowards. The words cut sharper than the wind itself. The men stared, stunned, half in awe and half in terror. Shawn wasn't just defying the storm, he was daring it to break him. Through that fury, something impossible flickered into view. As the cameras swept across the sluice box and the dredge's floodlights cut into the water, images appeared on the monitors that no one could explain. Beneath layers of gold and silt, carved timbers jutted from the seabed. They weren't random fragments of shipwreck. They were deliberate, worked by hands centuries ago. The grain of the wood bore symbols, etched deep and dark, older than Nome itself. Strange patterns that looked less like decoration and more like warnings. Divers swore they saw more. Amid the swaying currents, crates rested half-buried, bound in iron bands, their seams sealed with wax that had somehow survived the ages. They weren't scattered like wreckage, but stacked, organized, cargo hidden deliberately. A forgotten vessel, a trader's hoard lost to storm, or something far older, carried across oceans by men whose names had been erased by time. The crew whispered to each other, voices trembling. What lay under them might be worth more than all the gold Nome had ever seen. But Shawn's focus never wavered. "Leave it," he barked. His eyes burned, his jaw set. "The gold comes first." He knew what he'd seen. He knew what it meant. But the weight of fortune already filling his ship left no room for distractions, even if those distractions hinted at something greater than legends. By now, the dredge was a beast straining against its own load. Every ton of rock and metal pressed harder, and the hull complained with sounds that chilled the crew to their marrow. The scales on board had already confirmed what the eye refused to believe. $20 million in raw gold sat within their reach. But the fortune that should have saved them threatened instead to drag them all to the bottom. Arguments broke out. Men shoved each other on deck, shouting that the only way to live was to throw part of the haul back into the sea. Better to lose half the treasure than to sink with all of it. But others screamed the opposite, that walking away from even an ounce of this was a crime against fate itself. The dredge rocked under their fight, fists swinging, voices breaking. Then one man spat out what everyone else feared to say, mutiny. He'd take the controls himself if Shawn wouldn't. The captain's fury was volcanic. Shawn spun on him, his voice shaking with rage. No one abandons this haul. Not 1 ounce, not 1 speck. This is the century's gold, and it's ours. The deck fell silent, the storm itself seeming to pause, as though waiting to see which man would break first. The one threatening mutiny, or the one who'd staked everything against the sea. But the dredge didn't wait. Its groans grew louder, the steel flexing under the strain. The vessel teetered on the edge, overloaded with wealth too heavy to bear, caught between the roar of a storm above and the pull of the abyss below. Glory and destruction balanced on the same blade, and every man aboard knew that one wrong move would decide which side they fell to. The sea pressed harder, the dredge trembled, and Shawn, eyes blazing, refused to let go. Every impact, every groan, every shadow of danger carried far beyond the frozen waves. Word of the dredge's struggle had already begun to ripple through Nome, carried on radios, whispered by fishermen returning from the outer channels and spreading faster than the wind across the docks. The town's pulse quickened with each update, as if the storm at sea had reached a shore, pressing on hearts as surely as it pressed on steel. Onshore, Nome had never felt so tense. Families lined the docks, bundled against the icy wind, their breath misting in the freezing morning air. Children clung to parents' coats, their eyes wide, staring at the horizon where Shawn Pomrenke's dredge had disappeared into the storm the night before. Radios crackled in every corner, bursts of static and frantic voices carrying fragments of news, half-truths, and wild exaggerations. Some said the dredge had sunk. Others swore they saw it limping back, laden with more gold than any ship had ever carried. No one knew which version to believe, and that uncertainty made every heartbeat feel like a hammer striking steel. Rival miners gathered in shadowed corners of the town, scribbling calculations on napkins and backs of envelopes, running the impossible numbers over and over. Could a single haul really hold $20 million worth of gold? Could one man's obsession truly change the balance of Nome forever? Some shook their heads, muttering that even the best dredge couldn't survive what Shawn had survived. Others smirked, trying not to betray envy or fear, knowing that if the rumors were true, the Pomrenke name had just leapt to the top of Nome's hierarchy in one night. In bars and camps, arguments broke out as fast as fires in dry grass. Some bets were shouted across tables, voices rising over the clinking of glasses and the hiss of steam from boiling coffee. Wagers flew on, whether Shawn would return alive, whether his crew would survive the storm, and whether the haul would be real, or just another legend that Nome would whisper about for decades. Skeptics and believers collided, fists pounding tables in frustration, eyes darting to the horizon as if sheer willpower could pull the truth closer. Every person in Nome was caught in a wave of anticipation, waiting for the dredge to appear and confirm or shatter the rumors that had taken on a life of their own. And then, as if the storm itself had answered the town's frantic energy, the first faint silhouette appeared through the fog, a shape battered by ice and wind, moving with the weight of a night's impossible struggle, cutting a path through the churning water. Every eye strained, every heartbeat quickened as the line between rumor and reality began to blur. Dawn broke slow and grey, washing the harbor in cold, diffuse light. Through the fog, a battered silhouette emerged, Shawn's dredge, scarred by ice and battle, limping but unbroken. The vessel groaned with every wave, steel bending and creaking as it cut through the water, carrying the impossible weight of the night's triumph. Dockhands scrambled forward, ropes and lines at the ready, adrenaline pumping in veins like wildfire. Every movement was careful, tense, each man aware that the difference between a miracle and a disaster was measured in inches and seconds. As the dredge pulled alongside the pier, crates, barrels, and buckets were unloaded with frantic precision. The scales shuddered under the first loads, heavy with raw ore, each thud sending vibrations up through the dock, rattling the nerves of onlookers. More followed, heavier and heavier, gold spilling into containers that groaned under the strain. The numbers climbed faster than any accountant could track, yet it was impossible to ignore the truth as it crystallized in front of everyone. $20 million, raw and untamed, pulled from the frozen floor of the Bering Sea in a single haul. Crewmen collapsed, some on their knees, others doubled over in disbelief. Tears streamed down faces etched with ice, sun, and exhaustion, mixed with the sweat of near-death labor. Some laughed hysterically, while others whispered prayers of thanks to gods, ancestors, or luck. Whatever force had carried them through the storm, the cave-ins, and the crushing weight of the dredge. Hands shook as gold nuggets the size of fists were passed from man to man. Some men swore they'd never seen such wealth outside of museums, and yet here it was, tangible, gleaming, real. And through the chaos, Shawn stood silent. He did not cheer. He did not collapse. He watched unmoving as the haul was counted, stacked, and measured. He knew what the gold represented. Yes, but he also knew what lay beneath it. The carved timbers, the wax-sealed crates, the symbols older than Nome itself. They were still in the water, untouched and speaking of secrets beyond this century. He had taken the gold first. That was survival, triumph, and proof of skill. But the mysteries remained, hidden and patient, waiting for the next man bold, or foolish, enough to find them. The harbor erupted around him, a cacophony of celebration, disbelief, and envy. Cheers echoed off steel hulls, whistles pierced the cold air, and fists pounded on tables and decks alike. Names were shouted, tales of the dredge's survival spread faster than fire in dry brush. Every man on shore felt it. History had just been pulled from the sea, and they had been witnesses. But amid the jubilation, a weight pressed on Shawn's shoulders that no cheer could lift. The knowledge that legends were never free, and fortune always demanded its price. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting long shadows over the harbor, the clamor began to settle into stories, whispers, and awe. Faces turned to him with a mixture of reverence and envy, and Shawn realized that the events of this day would not remain in memory alone. They were already becoming something larger, something mythic. The lines between reality and legend blurred in every retelling, each shout and cheer amplifying the story beyond the docks, beyond Nome, beyond the moment itself. By nightfall, the story of Shawn Pomrenke had taken on the dimensions of myth. Nome whispered his name in awe, in fear, in envy. He was no longer just a miner. He was the man who had drawn $20 million from the frozen Bering Sea, who had stared down storms, mutiny, and collapse, and survived. His name became synonymous with gold, with audacity, with the kind of luck and skill that turns ordinary lives into stories that echo across generations. The town didn't stop at the gold. The mystery of the artifacts, the carved timbers, the wax-sealed crates spread like wildfire. Some dismissed it as sailors' tales. Some claimed they had seen the footage, shaky and flickering, but undeniable. Whatever truth lay beneath, it added layers to Shawn's legend, a secret waiting in the depths, a promise that even the richest man in Nome had not seen everything the sea had to offer. Rivals cursed quietly in bars and on shorelines, swearing they would hunt that forbidden grid next season. Some plotted strategies, others merely shook their heads, aware they had been beaten by audacity, luck, and sheer perseverance. And Shawn, he offered only hints, brief flashes of intent, when asked if he would return. His voice was calm, but piercing. The Bering Sea still hides more. You've only seen a glimpse. It was neither threat nor reassurance. It was truth. The fortune they had seen was only the beginning. As the docks emptied and the gold was secured, Nome slept under a strange hush. Men dreamed of what had been taken, of what might still lie below, and of the gamble that had made one man a living legend. Shawn Pomrenke had changed the rules. He had rewritten history for the town, for the sea, for everyone who had ever dreamed of fortune in Nome. And yet, the truth lingered like a shadow over the harbor. Gold could be found, storms could be survived, but legends were never without cost, and the Bering Sea always demanded another gamble from those brave or foolish enough to seek it.